Hello houseplant fans, it's Jane Perrone and we're here to talk about succulents. Yes, this is On the Ledge, the podcast for people who like plants that live in your house. Possibly on the ledge, possibly not. And this week our guest is Colin Walker, President of the British Cactus and Succulent Society. We'll be finding out about the aloe family, including how to fix your miserable-looking aloe vera, discovering exactly what succulents need in terms of potting soil, and finding out how cat litter can help you with your propagation. It's a packed show today, so do stay tuned, and as always, visit the show notes at janeperrone.com, and there you'll find loads of extra resources and loads of fantastic pictures from Colin showing him and his plants, which will be fascinating to look at, so do check that out as well. And if after the interview with Colin you're left thinking, oh, I wish there was more of that was so interesting, well, I'm glad to say there is a solution. You can head on over to On The Ledge's Patreon page and unlock extra special On The Ledge goodies which nobody else gets. You just have to pledge $5 a month or more to On The Ledge and you will become a Patreon subscriber, and that way you'll be able to listen to an extra interview with Colin in which he talks about sansevierias and some really interesting stuff on them, plus fertilising cacti and succulents. And you'll also find out what's coming up in upcoming shows. So if you're a really big fan of the show and you just want more, lay down $5 a month or more. Now that's $5. What would I spend $5 on? I might spend $5 on 2 coffees, or I might spend $5 on a magazine. So for $5 a month, you're getting 4 whole episodes of On The Ledge, plus the extras that you get on Patreon, which includes 2 extra interviews every month at the minimum. So it's a great deal. Check that out. Head on over to janeperrone.com where you'll find full details of how to get onto Patreon. If you want to give a one-off donation, it's code-fi.com you need. And again, the links are on janeperrone.com. But anyway, enough of that. Let's get on with talking to Colin. Colin is a retired university lecturer who lives in Scotland, where he has 2 large greenhouses, a conservatory, a porch, and thousands of succulents. Sound good? Yeah, sounds great to me. He was a biologist at the Open University with a research interest in cacti and succulents, particularly in terms of biodiversity. And he's the co-author of a book called Aloes, the Definitive Guide, which was published in 2011 by Kew Gardens and the British Cactus and Succulent Society. He's been doing that job for 5 years, and before that he was editor for 12 years of Bradleia, which is the BCSS scientific journal. So I think you can gather from what I've said so far, this guy knows his stuff. So I wanted to find out from Colin how his obsession with cacti and succulents started, and then drill into some useful information about Aloes and Agaves, 2 of his favourites from the succulent plant family.
I started when I was about 15. My mum had a few plants on windowsills, and, kind of by osmosis, the interest kind of percolated across to me. And the big event that really got me going was my mum and dad, so about 15 years old, took me to a local agricultural show. This is in Cheshire. And there, Brian Firm from Abbey Brook Cactus Nursery in Sheffield had a stand, and that was it. I was just besotted by them. I came away with a big box full of plants, and that was it. There was kind of no turning back.
So that was how it all began, and Colin then engaged on monthly day trips involving quite a long journey, involving a couple of trains and a walk, to get to the nursery to spend his pocket money and come back with a box of plants. He got a small wooden greenhouse on his 18th birthday, and the rest is history. And if you're interested, Abbey Brook Cacti is still actually there up near Sheffield. It's still going very strong. And it's worth pointing out that, according to its About page, this was the first commercial nursery in the world to declare in 1963 that it wouldn't deal in field-collected material, which is a really, really important thing because so many cacti and succulents are threatened in the wild. So that's definitely worth checking out. Abbey Brook cacti, I'll link to it in my show notes. But now let's get on with chatting to Colin about aloes. Or is it aloes?
I say aloes, but some people say aloes, but I say aloes. So let's go with aloes.
What is it about this group of plants that particularly fascinates you?
It's the diversity, I suppose, is one of the things. There's about 500 species, so that's naturally occurring species. But then a lot of cultivars have been produced in cultivation, so there's a vast range. And, they range from the tiny little Aloe descoinzii, which has rosettes only, 5 centimetres, 2 inches across. This comes from Madagascar, so that's one end of the scale. And at the other end of the scale are big tree aloes, which can be up to 60, 70 feet tall. And between that is a vast range of plants. Some grow on cliffs and hang down, some got small prickly rosettes. And the smaller plants flower quite well. The flowers are quite attractive. They're generally sort of in the orange, yellow, red end of the spectrum. There are a few that are white. Most of them are brightly coloured because they're bird pollinated. So in South Africa, these tubular flowers that hang down attract sunbirds as the pollinators, and the flowers drip quite a lot of nectar, so the pollen and the nectar is the reward for the sunbirds. So they're beautiful plants, and there's a lot of diversity to choose from, and quite a lot ideal for growing on a windowsill because they're quite small. So you have to be selective. Obviously, you do not want to grow a big tree aloe in the house because it would just outgrow the space quite quickly. But there's a lot that will, stay in a small pot, 4 or 5 inches max, and flower annually on a windowsill. So there's a lot to choose from.
One of my most common questions on the show is the classic aloe vera that has bent over, gone mushy, or looking pale, generally unhappy. And yet I kind of think of this plant as being quite easy to grow, but I do know that lots of people seem to have problems with it, and it is one of the most common aloes that people grow because it's valued for its medicinal qualities and so on. Where do most people go wrong with aloes, and specifically with aloe vera?
I suspect they may be overwatering. I mean, that is the general failing of people in terms of growing succulents. They tend to overwater them. So first off, make sure you've got your plant in a container that is draining. So I would say never put an aloe, or any succulent actually. My recommendation would be don't plant them into a container that doesn't have drainage holes at the bottom. So if you've got a pot that doesn't have drainage holes and you water, even if you just water once a week, you're probably ending up with too much water in the pot. So first off, drainage holes so it's free draining. The potting soil or potting mix or compost that you use should be free draining as well. For the UK audience, my standard potting mix is John Innes and grit. So I use a mix that's about 2/3 John Innes to 1/3 grit, or sand will do. So it's quite free draining, and most of my plants, apart from the very big ones, are watered once a week. So the next thing I'd say to anybody in terms of advice is go easy on the watering, just a little water once a week. How does that sound for starters?
That sounds very good. I think, that is a problem. And I think a lot of people don't realise the high levels of light these plants need also. You can't really put them in a shady corner and expect them to thrive. That seems to be another issue that comes up with plants, particularly in the winter time, just suffering from a lack of light.
Absolutely. So, the next factor is light. So any cactus and succulent, there are one or two exceptions, but let's say most cacti and succulents, you want them on a sunny... Well, if you've only got a house with windowsills, they're perfect for those. South-facing windowsills are best, obviously, so give them lots of light, because these plants mainly come from arid environments that receive an awful lot of sunshine, a lot more than we get where I'm sitting at the moment in terms of Glasgow, for instance. At the moment it's dull in Glasgow. But yeah, most of these plants come from regions of the world where there's high light intensity. So these are not good plants for shady conditions. So, sunny windowsill, south-facing preferably. Plenty of light. The more light you can give them, the better. In terms of growing them as house plants, you can't give them too much sunlight, I would say.
And tell us about some of the other aloes that you'd recommend for windowsill growing. The kind of the most exciting or the prettiest or the most curious.
You want aloes that are going to stay small. As I say, quite a lot of them can get quite large. So the common one that used to be a very common house plant is Aloe variegata, and it's called variegata because it has like zebra-like stripes on the leaves. The leaves are arranged in 3 rows, and they're triangular. And they're striped, so there's a pale green and a darker green. So it's like zebra stripes on the leaves. That's why it's called variegata. And that's an ideal house plant. It produces a small flower spike about a foot and a half with red tubular flowers. And that seems to do very well on windowsills. So that's Aloe variegata. There's lots of new little cultivars, hybrids that are very attractive and do well on windowsills. And pink lace is one of my favourite. It has a flower spike, about a foot long, and it has these dainty little pink bell-like flowers. So that's another one. Aloe aristata, it has dark green leaves, and it has little nodules or tubercles on the leaves, so it's a slightly spiny plant. Again, that does well on a windowsill and will send out quite a lot of pups, so in time you can get quite a large clump of that. The individual rosettes are only about up to about 3 inches across, so that's quite tough actually. In the south of England, you could grow that outdoors in the winter. It's actually frost hardy. How's that for start?
I've got an Aloe aristata which is very prized because it was given to me, must be nearly 20 years ago, by a couple who are, funnily enough, moving to Scotland and couldn't take all their plants with them. And it's been with me all this time, and it lives in my sort of, it's not quite a greenhouse, it's a greenhouse come potting shed in the winter, totally dry, and then it comes out in the summer. And it's just a great plant. It's very, very easy. It never gives me any trouble. It flowers beautifully every year, and I don't have to put any effort into keeping it alive, and it's given me lots of pups as well over the years as well to hand on to other people. So that one is a particularly special one to me. And as you say, it's so hardy. I think as long as it doesn't get wet around the roots, I think it will be fine.
Protection from rain is good, but it's the kind of plant that you could pop outside onto your patio in the summer, but make sure you bring it indoors in the winter, unless you can give it some protection, because that would get killed. It's not the low temperature that will kill it, it's the wetness. So wet and cold is not good for any of these plants, but if you can keep it dry, it will certainly survive quite low temperatures, yeah.
What is the geographical range of the native aloe? Which continents are we seeing this plant on?
Most of them occur in Africa, throughout most of Africa, into West Africa, but not so south of the Sahara. Okay, and there are centres of diversity. So South Africa has about 140 species. And East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, and going north into Somalia, Ethiopia and Somalia, there's quite a lot of species there. Then going eastwards, Madagascar is a centre of diversity. There's about 150 species there. Going northeast from Africa into Arabia, and that's about as far east as they go. There are records of aloe vera occurring in India, but that's not where it naturally occurs. So aloe vera is an exception. It has become naturalized in various parts of the world because it is planted as an economic crop. So if you go to places like Barbados, Kenya, the Canary Islands in particular, aloe vera is a crop plant. It's, as you mentioned earlier, it's the basis of a multi-billion-dollar industry in terms of toiletries and cosmetics. One of the largest plantations I've yet seen is on the island of Lanzarote in the Canary Islands. There's this fabulous aloe plantation in the north of the island where there's just, acre after acre of aloe vera in neat serried rows. But the climate of Lanzarote is very dry, so they irrigate it.
That sounds amazing. And I keep seeing on Facebook these videos that people make of huge aloe vera leaves being sliced open and people then putting them in drinks and all sorts of things. Have you ever tried the flesh of an aloe vera? Would you recommend it?
Because of my interest in aloes, I give talks, presentations on aloes. So in the early days, when I was putting together my first aloe talk, I kind of went to health food shops and whatever to buy various aloe vera products. And one of them was a drink from a health food shop. And, Jane, it was absolutely disgusting. I do not recommend. But then I realised that you're not meant to drink it neat. You're meant to mix it with fruit juice. So if you mix it with fruit juice, it's quite palatable. Now, whether drinking aloe vera has any medicinal benefit, I have no idea. What is scientifically proven is that aloe vera is a very good treatment for burns. So a lot of people keep aloe vera on their kitchen windowsill and will take off a leaf if one of the kids gets a burn, for instance. So what you do there is if there is a burn, obviously this isn't a major burn, just a minor burn. Obviously, if you've got a major burn, you need to seek medical advice. There's the health warning. But, just for a small burn, you just take an aloe vera leaf and split it down the middle to release the juicy inner core and just slap it on a burn. And it is a very efficacious treatment for burns. Probably the active ingredients are... There's probably some antibiotics in there, but there's also some components of aloe vera juice which stimulate cell growth. So if you've got damaged skin cells, there are components in aloe vera juice which will stimulate repair of damaged skin, and that is scientifically proven. But taking it internally, I'm not so sure about that, but it might be the same effect because effectively, the lining of your gut is skin. So if you've got damaged gut lining, it may be that aloe vera juice is beneficial for that, but there is no scientific evidence that I'm aware of for that. So by all means, drink aloe vera juice diluted in fruit juice, I would recommend. And it may well be beneficial, but who knows?
Oh, that's very interesting. I think I'll stick to using it on minor burns outside. It doesn't sound like the most palatable drink. I think there's probably more tasty options. But let's move on to talking about your other passion in the succulent world, I believe, which is agaves.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, they look superficially similar to aloes. For a long time, they were known as American aloes, but botanically, they are not closely related at all. So aloes are native to the old world, so as I say, principally Africa, Arabia, and Madagascar, whereas agaves are native to the New World. So in terms of plant evolution, it is called convergent evolution. So the two different genera, aloe and agave, have evolved to produce sort of similar shaped leaves, similar structures, because they grow in similar environments. So agaves grow in the arid areas of the Americas. So most species come from Mexico. About 200 species occur in Mexico. Then there's a few going north into the States, a few going south into Central America and South America, and there's about 20 species in the Caribbean islands. But in terms of diversity, most species come from Mexico. So they have a similar look to aloes. They're rosette plants, so the leaves are arranged in a circular arrangement. And they have long, thin, sort of spiky leaves. The flowers, though, are completely different. When an aloe flowers, it doesn't die. So an aloe, once it reaches maturity, once it gets to flowering size, will keep flowering year on year. An agave, though, an agave rosette only flowers once, and it can take a long time for an agave to come to flower. in my 50 years of growing cacti and succulents, I've only flowered 6 agaves so far. And the ones I can accurately pinpoint have been about 25 to 30 years old before they flower. So it's an age thing, they need to reach maturity before they flower, and they put all their energy into flowering. So the biggest species, the biggest plant is Agave americana, and in a pot that will take about 25, 30 years to get to flower. If it's planted in the ground, it will flower quicker. So when an Agave americana flowers, the flower spike is about 30 foot high. This is this mammoth sort of telegraph pole-like structure, and that rosette dies after flowering, so it produces this enormous flower spike and dies after flowering. But some of these, like Agave americana, will have pupped, so the pups won't flower and they'll continue on that plant. But quite often you have a single rosette, it flowers once and dies. So the 6 plants that I flowered only had a single rosette, flowered once and died, so that was it, they've gone. So they're very spectacular when they do it, but they only do it once.
Going back to the potting mix issue, when I'm reading the journal of the BCSS, which obviously I read cover to cover, one of the things that strikes me is that everyone seems to have their own preferences on this. I remember reading a piece about why you shouldn't put a mulch of a fine grit on the top of your pots, people suggesting using different mixes, cat litter coming up as a component of your potting mix. Everyone seems to have their own recipe, which I'm sure is absolutely fine. But do you find this, that everyone's got their kind of secret little signature mix that they use?
Absolutely, but all these mixes will have one main component, and that is something, some item, some component which ensures that the potting mix is free draining. As I said, my basic mix is about 2/3 John Innes and 1/3 grit. That's my standard. And most people will have that sort of ratio. So there's some component in there that is giving good drainage, and it can vary. You mentioned cat litter. I use cat litter a lot. Now, if you're talking cat litter, it's very important that you get the right stuff. There's 2 completely different sorts of cat litter. Obviously, the main purpose of cat litter is to absorb cat pee, right? So some of the cat litters just do that. They are very powdery, and they'll absorb cat pee, which then clumps. That is not the kind of cat litter you want to use for your plants. The cat litter we use is the granular stuff, and it stays granular and it doesn't clump, and it provides the equivalent of grit. But the benefit of using that kind of granular cat litter is that it's quite light. So if you're potting into big pots, it kind of reduces the weight because, large pots, and I'm talking, 30 centimetres, 12 inches or more, when you've got a lot of compost in that sort of pot and a plant, it's quite heavy. And some people have got big plants, 3 feet across and more. I've got plants like that, and they are very heavy. I've got some big agaves now in the greenhouse, which it took 2 people to lift into the greenhouse. So now they're in the greenhouse, they're not being moved again. So cat litter is beneficial for 2 reasons. One is that it provides free drainage, and it's also lightweight. And the other great use of this granular cat litter is rooting. I use it as my rooting medium. So if I take cactus cuttings, aloe cuttings, or plants that have lost their roots and I'm wanting to re-establish them, push them into a pot or a tray or a pan of cat litter, and it's brilliant for getting these plants to root. And it's really good because, again, it's free draining, so when you water them, the water isn't sitting around the base of that plant that's not got any roots, and it also allows air or oxygen into the roots as well. So cat litter is a wonderful, obviously it's not the cheapest component you can use, but it really is beneficial. It's a great item. I use it a lot. But yeah, you're right. Everybody has their own mix, and it's what works for the individual. Everybody has their own kind of watering regime, so people get used to their own potting mix and their watering regime. But the main component is a significant amount of some material, whether it's grit, sand, cat litter, or all sorts of other things, that make the compost or give the compost free draining properties.
Let's move from potting mix to pots, because I think this is something which you are trying to pioneer in the BCSS. While the plastic pot is probably the best thing to plant cacti and succulents in. Maybe there's an argument for terracotta, I don't know, you can tell me, but we should also think about how these things are going to look on our windowsills if we're growing them indoors, and I believe that this is something you're trying to get people interested in, growing in attractive containers. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is kind of one of my interests at the moment, I have to say. So there are two basic types of pot, as you said, plastic and terracotta. The benefits of plastic are they're cheap and they can be quite uniform. So some people like a uniform look, so all pots the same size or shape or whatever. And you can get that with plastic as opposed to terracotta generally. So the other thing is that a plastic pot, because it's plastic and isn't porous, doesn't dry out so quickly. So it kind of reduces the amount of watering you have to do. But to be honest, a greenhouse full of plastic pots is fine. But if you're just a windowsill grower, you want whatever you're growing to look attractive. And a row of plastic pots on a windowsill, to be honest, looks a bit naff. So I'm an advocate of growing cacti and succulents in attractive containers, and I think that's pretty important if you've just got a small collection as house plants, So I've been pushing for growing plants in attractive containers, and so I've got a mixture actually. I've got two greenhouses where a lot of the plants, I have to say, are in plastic just because of the sheer number of them. But there's a significant number that are either in terracotta or glazed pots. But I've also got a conservatory, and there's sort of a house rule that plastic is banned from the conservatory because the conservatory is actually part of the house. And we've got a table in there, and we sit and have breakfast or lunch or whatever. And it's actually quite nice to look around the conservatory, which I'm surrounded by windowsills full of cacti and succulents, and the larger plants are sitting on the floor. So I've got a mixture of terracotta and glazed pots, usually attractive pots, nice shiny glazes and whatever, and the plants look really great in them. Of course, they're on a windowsill, and every pot has got drainage holes in the bottom, and I'm rather generous with watering, so all my pots in the conservatory, I've either got a tray underneath them or some kind of saucer so that the water doesn't dribble out onto the wooden windowsills or the tiled floor. But you just walk into the conservatory and there's a very attractive display of succulents. So, the average person who's just growing plants on a windowsill wants to kind of emulate that good look or attractive appearance. So that's kind of why I've been pushing it. And my wife and I sponsored a new class at the last national. So the British Cactus and Succulent Society has a big national show every 4 years. And at the last one, my wife and I sponsored a brand new class for plants in attractive or unusual container. And it was very popular. There were 43 entries for that one class alone out of about 140 classes. So I think it was the most entries that a class in a national show had ever attracted. So although I'm pushing this, there are a lot of growers who are equally enthusiastic about presenting their plants, their cacti and succulents, in an attractive way, particularly, on a show bench, which is open to the general public. So the plants are there on display, and you want, an attractive presentation. So that's kind of why I've been pushing it. And there's a growing trend for presenting cacti and succulents attractively in attractive containers. And it doesn't need to be a pot. There's all sorts of other containers that people use as well.
So give me some examples of the most sort of out there containers that you've seen so far.
Oh, right. Well, there's a good one. I started down the route of growing plants in teapots. So I have a small collection of plants in teapots. Now, this started because I broke the lid of a teapot, and what you do with a teapot that doesn't have a lid, I thought, well, let's convert this to a plant pot. So I drilled a hole in the bottom of it. So all my novelty pots have holes because, as I said earlier, drainage is very important. So if you just put a plant into a teapot without a drainage hole in the bottom, chances are the water would be contained and the plant would rot. So everything I have has drainage holes. Yeah, so I've got a small, modest collection of plants in teapots. I also have 2 plants in potties, one of which is a family heirloom.
I've got to stop. Potties? Did you actually say potties?
Yes, I did say potties. I did, yes. I have 2 plants in potties. I suppose that's the most unusual container I've got, but this class at the National Show attracted some very interesting entries. People were quite creative, shall we say. I mean, my favourite was a collection of lithops, which lithops come from South Africa, and they look like living stones, right? So in the wild, these grow amongst pebbles and stones, so they're camouflaged. Their appearance mimics the natural environment where they grow. So these are called living stones. So this particular person planted some lithops or living stones in what is best described as a David Livingstone explorer's hat, right? So this hat has been turned upside down, and the lithops or living stones are planted in it. And very cleverly, they used pebbles on which they'd written Dr. Livingstone, I presume. That was really clever. I was very impressed with that entry.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, I mean,
Shall I give you one other example?
Please do.
Jane? There was, I suppose, a ceramic container that looked like the sack in which you'd have flour, okay? So you can envisage this as sort of a ceramic sack that looks like a flour sack. The plant, though, was a woolly white mammillaria, so it looked like the plant kind of mimicked the flower, and that was a very clever idea. So white wool in a sack, it looked like, you know, the woolly plant kind of mimicked the flower. That was flour as in, you know, baking flour. That was another very clever. So people were really very creative.
Yeah, that's great. And it's, as you say, once you start thinking about that, really there are so many things that you can repurpose. And I guess also save some money on buying traditional pots.
Let me give you one other example. This was what started me off. I used to work for the Open University. I'm now retired. Anyway, the office next to mine was being cleared out, and there was this pot in this office, and I claimed it, so it didn't cost me anything. And envisage this pot as being like an upside-down top hat. It's black, it's matte, it's not glossy. And I thought, that's perfect. And I think what it was the liner of a slow cooker, okay? So think about a large slow cooker about, a foot across. So this is a ceramic lining to a slow cooker, so it's got a wide brim, okay? And I thought that was perfect, so I drilled holes into it. It was black and matte, and I planted a grey-leaved agave into it, and that was perfect. The grey leaves, and it also had 2-inch long dark purple spines on the leaf tip. So this contrasted to the matte black of the container. And that's the best combination of pot and plant I have ever come up with. And you know, Jane, that pot can cost me nothing. And it's a fabulous pot. I've had it for about 15 years now. So that's my best example of recycling a container and converting something that wasn't a pot into a plant pot.
I would love one day to pluck up the courage to enter something, a cactus or a succulent, in a BCSS show, but I'm not sure I'm quite ready for that yet. Tell me a bit about the BCSS and what membership can bring you in terms of enhancing your cactus and succulent hobby.
Okay. The British Cactus and Succulent Society was formed in 1983 from the amalgamation of two other societies. It's got an international membership. Obviously, most people live in the UK, but there's quite a lot overseas as well. The society provides all sorts of benefits. There's a journal which is published 4 times a year, so there's lots of advice in that and lots of wonderful pictures and articles about different groups of plants, both in cultivation and in the wild. Obviously, a lot of us are interested in going out to the habitats of these plants and taking lots of photographs and come back and write travelogues and stuff like that. So one of the main benefits is a journal. The society has about 80 branches around the country. Most of the branches meet regularly, once a month, say. So wherever you are in the country, there will be a branch not that far from you. I'm now living in Glasgow, just north of Glasgow. There are 5. Scotland is a bit Spartan in terms of branches, I have to say. There's only 5 branches in Scotland. But anyway, I fortunately live just on the northern edge of Glasgow, so my local branch is only about 10 miles away. But most branches, you'd have, no matter where you are in the country, a branch won't be that far away from it. So the branches meet usually once a week. They usually have an invited speaker or something like that. There'll be plants for sale. There'll be plants on display. What other benefits are there? So obviously we're now thinking about the online environment. The society has a website. There's a lot of information there about cultivation. You can find information out about your local branch. There'll be a branch. Each branch will have posted on the website a program, so you can see what kind of interesting talks there are and so on. There is a very active forum, so you can chat away to interested enthusiasts, and a lot of people post up pictures. An exciting plant has flowered for the first time, so they'll post up a picture, and there'll be discussion about that. This is the first time my whatever has flowered. What did I do to be so lucky for that to happen, or can I pass on advice, and so on and so forth. So the website has got a lot of information. Other benefits, the society has an annual seed distribution. So that list is published about March time, so you can buy seed. I don't know, I can't remember now, maybe about 200 different species and varieties of seed are on offer every year. If you can get to branches, you can chat to people, you can listen to an interesting speaker, you can get advice from people. Quite a lot of branches hold their own local show. So as I say, I'm a member of a Glasgow branch, so we had our show back in June. That was at the Glasgow Botanic Gardens, and there you can see a very good range of plants on display. And it's good for the general public as well, because the general public can come in and see our show.
Well, that's plenty. I think the great thing is that the BCSS is embracing social media and things and coming into that realm to kind of look at meeting those people in the middle who are the millennials and the young people who are getting into cacti and succulent. And, their natural home is Instagram and Facebook, and they want to kind of engage on that level. And I think that's fantastic that that's happening. I know the BCSS has an Instagram account, which I will link to in my show notes. And I think that's great that that's being embraced, because I know traditionally plant societies, not just the BCSS, but plant societies of all kinds are generally tend to have an older demographic just through the nature of what they do. But it's fantastic to see that there's so many young people coming into being interested in this stuff. And I guess, yes, a lot of them are going to have one plant which they kill, but there's going to be a percentage who, like you as a child, will get obsessed and become lifelong fans.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I got hooked, and 50 years later, I'm still hooked. But you're correct, Jane, in that for gardening clubs, societies, or whatever, one of the big issues is the aging demographic. You're absolutely right. And we've got a new chairman of the society, and Ian Thwaites is very much into developing our online presence to encourage youngsters. This is very important. You're absolutely right. We want to get more young. We want more people. I was 15 when I, got hooked, and we want to get more people of that kind of age. The youngsters. We absolutely want to encourage the youngsters. Otherwise, these horticultural and gardening societies, clubs, whatever, are just going to fizzle out, aren't they? So getting younger people engaged and participating is absolutely essential. I have to say, in the Glasgow branch of the society, I was delighted to see that quite a lot of younger people, shall we say. But it is very important. We do need to engage much more with social media, and Ian, the new chairman, is absolutely up for that. So that is one of his principal missions, actually, to engage more. We have been engaged in social media. We have a significant online presence. The forum is absolutely great, because not only is the forum important for people who do not or cannot get to branch meetings, but it's also very important because it broadens out the society, because there are a significant number of overseas contributors to the forum. And the society is international. We've got a significant number of overseas members, and obviously they can't get to branch meetings, but they can actively participate in the society through its online forum. So the online forum is very important, and as you say, involvement and increasing involvement in social media is very important.
Well, that's fantastic to see that the society is thriving, and I hope its membership will be skyrocketing in the next few years. As all those people who are kind of getting into the cacti and succulent appreciation will really embrace the BCSS, because I've found it very useful. And in fact, I was very annoyed because just after I'd bought all my seed for the Sow Along project, I got the leaflet from the BCSS with all the details of the seed sales and thought, oh gosh, I don't need any more seed now, but are there so many things in that list that I want to try. And the seed packets are ridiculously cheap. I can't think how much they are, but they're less than £1 per packet, aren't they? It's a very good scheme.
Absolutely. The seeds are quite cheap. I mean, I think we're talking like 20p a packet. There are different price brackets. The rarer things are a little bit more expensive. But yeah, I mean, I think all the packets are much less than £1. I can't quite remember. But yeah, the seeds are really relatively cheap, Jane. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much to Colin, and if you're interested in finding out more about the British Cactus and Succulent Society, then you can visit bcss.org.uk or visit my show notes for all the plants and links mentioned in this episode. Question of the week is a very brief one, and it's one for you listeners in the US. I've had a listener wanting to track down a plant called Alocasia dragon scale. So, if any of you know where to get hold of an Alocasia dragon scale in the US, preferably by mail order, I would love to hear from you so I can pass the information on. Do let me know via the usual channels, janeperrone.com, or you can email ontheledgepodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter @JanePerrone, and on Instagram I'm j.l.perrone. And you can also join the Facebook group Houseplant Fans of On The Ledge. We have 400 members now, which is fantastic. Come along and share pictures of your houseplants, ask questions, and generally hang out with like-minded folk. And that's it for this week. I'm putting out an episode next Friday, the 3rd of August, and then I'm taking 2 weeks off. So I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye. The music you heard in this week's episode was Roll Jordan Roll by the Joy Drops and Rasham Pidity Perkara by Samuel Corwin, both licensed under Creative Commons. See my website for details.